Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the managing director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. As the title of this video suggests, we're discussing kind of I don't know if I'd call this a series, but it's just something I've come up with, sort of Thailand tales, just observations. I've been out here a while and things I've just kind of noticed, and just kind of oddities about how things work, within the sort of the system, the legal system here, the immigration system. But one phenomenon that I was thinking about the other day, and frankly, I've had a lot of time to think because there's frankly nothing to do in the evenings or in one's off time other than think or read or, kind of tend to oneself. This notion of legend versus law, and what am I talking about here? Well, I've just kind of noticed, and, I came in right at the end, sort of 2007, 2008. I was here for most of 2000. Went through the bulk of 2008. I was coming in right at the end of 7, and the sort of, I don't know how you want, the zeitgeist, the sort of collective notions, the conventional wisdom might be the right word, might be the right phrase, of the expat community was an interesting beast, if you will, some 13, 14 years ago. And what I'm talking about here is when I first came to Thailand, when I first came to Bangkok, you heard a million different sort of explanations for why visas were done a certain way, or explanations about work permits, or explanations about the requirements associated with those things, explanations about how marriage worked in Thailand, or property rights and things. And there was this kind of almost mist, it was almost like ethereal, where these notions, you couldn't really pin them exactly down. And obviously there was law, but the internet on top of it actually kind of brought things into less focus, kind of made things more opaque. I mean, that was kind of the era, it was the true heyday of the forums, and there were a number of them, Thai Visa being one of the most notable. But there were a number of forums, and the internet was kind of a different beast. And I found it interesting at the time. There were a lot of misconceptions, a lot of things, a lot of practices. I've talked about the era of the ghost visa run, and where basically you give your passport to somebody and they'd run it to the border and have it stamped up and brought back, and you didn't have to do a quote-unquote visa run. That was always illegal, but everybody just kind of was in this kind of mist of grayness that was kind of considered acceptable during that period. And, obviously that's definitely come and gone. There were a lot of unfortunate consequences for some folks that kind of got caught up in that. They got their tail caught in a crack when that particular practice became much more, the law enforcement against it became much more aggressive, and some people got in real problems. The point I'm trying to make is, other things like the notion that a yellow Tebian bond, a yellow house book, exempted someone from having to do things like 90-day reporting. That I had heard that a few times, and one time I thought it myself because I didn't know any better until I checked it out. Again, it was just kind of a different time, and I think the further you go back in time, it gets more and less opaque. And I really find it interesting that when I first came out here around, call it the beginning of 2008, right at the end of 2007, things were. It was actually kind of oddly more opaque because of the internet in a certain way. And the internet had not become quite as populated with information. Things like YouTube didn't really exist on the level they do now. And again, this heyday of the forums, you'd have a lot of people just kind of talking, not really knowing what they were saying, or they were talking about something that worked one way in one place at one time. And then a lot of people would kind of take that, and it's like playing the telephone game. They kind of spread that information, disseminated around the broader expat community, and it would become kind of conventional wisdom. There were a number of different things that I saw at the time, that I heard back then that just they just weren't true, or it was sort of half true, and it wasn't really a clear representation of the way of the way whatever mechanism they were talking about actually worked. And then you cut to now, and it's rather interesting that things are much more, I would say, concise. I think there's quite a bit more clarity out there. Although with respect to some issues, I think perhaps there might be actually the same opacity. And it's just, to me, rather interesting, just this evolution that we've seen, especially mainly with things like immigration. I think that's really changed a lot. There was a time when that was much more vague, and you'd read things on the internet and it was just not quite so great. And now these days, I like to think I've hoped to provide some clarity out there. And now I think these days, it's just not quite the same as it was. That being said, there's still a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of misnomers out there floating around on the internet. So still a good idea to check and double check and maybe even contact a legal professional. But I do think it's interesting that we have seen a major shift with respect to sort of this information out there in the ether, these legends out there in the ether.